All right, so let's go ahead and discuss the next project. If you're still working on the badge, perfectly fine. If you're following along, whichever, perfectly fine. But I wanted to go ahead and discuss the next assignment. So this one is built around the Revolve tool, and the aim is to make a plant potting vessel. Just little thing, basically some form of bowl with some holes in the bottom and a tray. So what this is going to focus on is, again, sketches, but we're going to be, instead of working on the XY plane, we're going to be working in front of you. So that would be on the XZ plane. So think of it, instead of working on a table, you're working on like a workboard or something in front of you. From that, different line types. So basically very similar things to the badge. We're also going to be using the pattern tool to not only create different shapes and use the extrude tool to cut through the form, but we're also going to be using that tool in some different ways. So one of the things this project really goes over is that pretty much with any CAD project, there's no straight defined progression of steps to get to the end thing. You're going to find that certain projects will require you to either go back and splice in elements, or you'll have to repeat steps just in different manners so that you can get what you want out of a design. That'll make a lot more sense here in a few when we're modeling this. So the criteria for this project: it must be large enough to house a small plant. So something like 120 millimeters wide by probably 100 or just so deep. So some sort of vessel like that. I recommend a wall thickness of like 3 to 5 millimeters thick. Honestly, 5 is kind of overkill, but again, modeling it for modeling's sake. It must have drainage holes, and the number and design of which are totally up to you. It must include 2 or more components. Really just 2 components. Now, so far we have not discussed components. Components are above sketches and bodies and so forth on the hierarchy tree. I'll explain that more in a moment. We'll also start playing with the appearance tool. What that allows you to do is assign appearances to your models. So you're not just working with the default gray or the auto-assigned things. It's like you can assign, hey, I would like this to look like it's made out of aluminum or wood or stone. Ideally, this is for modeling effectiveness, but that also could potentially build into, if you were taking this to a machine shop or working directly with one, yeah, this is going to be modeled in aluminum or machined in aluminum, and you would go through the steps to do so. But for the right now, it's really just for the sake of appearance, so you can make it look like what you want it to look like. And this will be also due next week, along with the badge. These work very much on the same tool sets as the badge does. All right. So let's get to Lathe Fusion. All right. So this will be starting a new project. So in the data panel, remember that we will be in the Revolve Vessels folder. So when you go to save stuff, please make sure it's in there. So you can freeform this. You can model this off of something, whatever you would like. Perfectly fine either way. But I'm just going to freeform this. So, like I said before, first thing to do, really good, save your file immediately. Save. Example, and we'll do Collins.plant. Sure, there you go. Put your name into the file itself, so that way we know who it is. All right. So what do you know? We're going to start with sketches. So create a sketch. To do so, though, before we're working on the XY plane, here I'm going to choose the in front of me, the XZ plane, between the green or the yellow stripes, between the red and the blue. It's making secondary colors out of what I'm looking at. Ideally, switch the view cube to the front view. All right. So I want to show you a couple things, and one of which is why might you want to use separate sketches, and why might you want to make sure to use construction lines in your sketches. This would be a perfect place to use sketches for or a construction line sketch for a reference box. What I mean by that is, all right, I want my project to be 120 millimeters wide by 100 millimeters tall. You can go smaller, rough it around that, but that's basically what we're going for. So I'm going to start with a center rectangle box, and I'm going to select line type construction or press X, and I'm just going to start right in the center. And from there, I'm going to type in 100 millimeters wide. Oh, I'm going to make that 120. And then 100 millimeters tall. I accidentally made it a little bit bigger. There we go. That makes more sense. Okay. And I'm going to finish that sketch. That's all I want for that first sketch. So I'm going to expand the construction or the hierarchy tree here. And I just want to put in reference box. So that's just so I know how big the thing is. Once inside of that, I can play around. All right, let me resize to that. Hit F6 to resize. And now I'm going to start another sketch. This is going to be the actual sketch for the pot. Okay, so I don't want this to be about yay big. Now, how the Revolve tool works, think of if you've ever taken ceramics and sliced something in half, or you've broken a glass and seen just the edge. You are creating half of a profile, and what we're going to do is use the Revolve tool to create a 360 version of that slice of your vessel. Now, you do not need to make both sides. It's not like you're taking a mug and slicing it entirely in half. That, like the old Mad Hatter and half a cup of tea, not quite like that. You only need half of that half, or in other words, a quarter. So you just need one side of a profile. All right, so what that means is I'm going to start my project on the green line. I want to use that as my bisecting. And I'm just going to free form a line. I'm going to start somewhere in here. I'm going to allow the snap to lock onto the center axis there. And I'm just going to start drawing outward. I'm using a fit point spline here. I'm going to make this wider. Remember, it's going to be a straight line, the first 2 points, and then from there, it's going to start to curve. You can curve upward. You can start to go inward. It's not like you're locked into only being inside of that. If you want it to be a little bit larger, somewhere like that, that's fine. Just giving you those rough dimensions as just that as a general guide. Say, all right, I want it to be about that big. I'm going to make a big wide lip on it. Cool. Hit OK or enter. From here, remember, I can tweak the vertices if I want to make that come out a little bit more, or I want to use the handlebars to either pull that wider or augment. There we are, that too. Super good, glad. Okay. Now, one of the things I'm going to want to do is flatten this bottom. I can use the handlebars on this to use this to draw outward and bring that in line. And what I'm going to do, let me zoom in. And what I did is I just drug that handlebar until it snapped to one of the grid lines. Now the bottom here is more or less flat. Now, of course, I can still drag this vertex down and make it a little better. There we go. Okay. I hit OK, finish that. Now, this is where the offset tool is really helpful. Yes. Sorry? That's a separate sketch.
Oh, okay.
So if you see on my hierarchy tree, the reference box, that is the sketch line here. And I used the construction line version, or I changed them to construction lines to use them just as reference points.
Oh, okay.
Yep. No problem. So the offset tool here is really helpful because you will create as it says, copies your sketch line a specified distance away. Yeah, you can read it for yourself. But what that means is I can make alterations to my original line and that offset will follow suit. Meaning that if I made alterations to the outside, depending on what those alterations are, it will carry over to my offset line. Makes it a lot easier to make forms freeform, but maintain certain distances. So I'm going to use an offset tool. Of course, the box covers that. So there, whoops. You can use the slider or you can do it numerically. like I said, all right, 8 is right out. I honestly, I would really use like 2 to 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters is a good wall thickness. And there we are. Okay. So from here, what I need to do in order to make the Revolve tool work, this needs to be a closed sketch. So right now, these are just 2, yes, they're blue lines, but there's no blue hue inside to show that it's a closed sketch, meaning it's 2 open lines. There's no cap between them. So what I can do is I can just draw lines between here, or I can play around with that. So for right here, what's going to be the base of my Revolve, I'm going to just use a straight line, connect those 2 points. Hit OK. All right. For up here, I could draw a straight line between there, but that's boring, and I don't want to do that. I don't want it to have a sharp lip, effectively. If this were a glass, you don't want it intentionally to have like a sharp lip. I want that to be rounded. It's just my preference. So to do that, I could use either an ellipse tool, or I can use a circle tool. But rather than have to draw extra steps, I'm going to use the circle tool, but I'm going to use the 2-point circle. So what that does is rather than starting in the center and drawing outward, you start at 1 point, and then the second point defines the diameter of your circle. So click there. I'm going to select 1 point, and then you see it draws outward, which, what do you know, the diameter is 3 millimeters. Click there, hit escape to finish that tool. Great. So now you have these 2 separate lines, and now when I mouse over, it shows that by highlighting like that, they are closed profiles. Now I do want to trim this section out, so I'll go up here, use the trim tool, or just press T, chop that little chunk out of there. There we go. Hit escape. Okay. And in effect, the basic part is that's all you need for a profile. So I'm going to hit finish sketch. I'll come back and tweak that in a few. The next tool I want to use is the Revolve tool. So whereas the Extrude tool took a profile and drew it straight out, what the Revolve tool does is it takes that profile and revolves it around. Often this is also called the lathe tool. So if you're familiar with working with a lathe, your material is spinning and you're cutting away from it. Kind of sort of the same thing. You're creating just a singular profile and rotating that around. So I'm going to select that. Toolbox comes up. Select my profile. That one, the one that I did make. Now, unlike the mirror tool, you can just use the basic axis as your rotating axis. So the next tool, select axis. I'm going to hit the home button so you can see a little bit more clearly what I'm doing here. So now looking at a perspective view, you can see I just have this one single profile floating in space. I'm selecting the Z axis as my point of rotation. Boom. Instant vessel. Now, this is set on angle, and to fold and all that, you can dial this back. Say you were actually making just part of this. Maybe I wanted just half of a pot. I wanted to make that half a cup of tea. Type in 180 degrees, and now you can see what I meant by a cross section there. Just that little chunk. But for what we're doing, yeah, I want the whole to do. So back to 360. Hooray. All right, now this is going to create a new body. Okay. So far, I've created just that vessel. Yeah, it's a little large, a little garish, whatever. You play around with it as you like. But I want to create the plate that it sits on as well. I'm going to get to the features and such. But so far, as I've said, you will need 2 different components. And so far, we've been just working on one. A component is the highest type of hierarchy on the hierarchy tree. What that means is a component can contain bodies, sketches, canvases, all that sort. And then you can make another component and it can have its own set of all of that. The reason for this is so you can separate elements out and not just by bodies. Later on in the course, I'm going to show you how to create hinges and joints between 2 separate components, and they need to be separate components. Now, when you go to create a component, when I'm mousing over right here, this little square, that's showing me that is a singular component. To create a component, you go over to the assemble section, the top one, that's by default, this little stack of cubes. This says new component. Click here, Now, you can create a new component from separate bodies. So say you actually built a whole bunch of stuff within the same component. You got a stack of bodies, and you want to make a new component out of one of those, you can do that. But for right now, I just want a separate component entirely. So I have the main part selected here, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a moment. And I'm going to click OK. Now there's a new thing here. So a couple things happened. The body there, it ghosted itself out. That's because you're going to be starting a new thing entirely. Top of the hierarchy tree, let me collapse everything. Now you see that the symbol has changed. It's a stack of little squares, or cubes rather. That's showing there's multiple components within that component, or at least there's more than one. So we've got down here, and I'm going to put this as tray. Okay. So now I can expand this out, and right now there's only origin. But I can now build a set of sketches and everything else within that component. And when you were working like that, you have to activate the component. So unlike on all the way to the left, which hides and shows the little eyeball symbol, this little checkbox here, activate component. If I want to go back and activate everything, I go to the very top, click there, activates all the things. But I just want to work on just the tray component. All right. Now, when I click create sketch, working on the same axis, or the same plane rather, right there. Now you see it's expanded and created sketches down there too. All right, cool. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a tray. I want to use a fit point spline again, somewhere below there. Doesn't have to be right against, somewhere below. And I'm just going to kind of draw like what would become like a little tray. It's going to have a little bit of a lip. Hooray. There we are. That'll work. I'm going to use the offset tool. I'm going to go outward from here and out and make that, we'll make that 3 again. Whoops, I need that -3. I want that to go the other way. All right, there we go. So now the new offset line is larger rather than smaller than the original line. Okay, super. Now, like I said, you can adjust these. Things like this little dip in this, what will be this tray. If I were to make this, that would make for a very bad plate. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to adjust the handlebars on the initial point. Yep, that one. And as you see, now my offset line follows the tweaks that I'm making. So that's how you can adjust all of this stuff. Really helps out. This one's still not quite flat. I'm going to drag this around. Yeah, sort of, kind of-ish. Yeah. One is an offset of the other. Oh, okay. Yeah, of course. All right. So from here, now I'm going to go ahead and close this up. There we are. You zoom in so I can actually grab that point. Okay. Hit escape, the line tool. Now for this one here, I want to play around with this a bit more. So I want to make a circle, but I want to make it larger than what that one is. So I could do this a couple of different ways. I could start a line, and I'm going to use this as a construction line. I'm going to draw between these 2 points. All right, great. Next thing, now I'm going to make a circle around, but the reason I drew that construction line is because I want this circle to, in fact, start in the middle, but I want it to be larger than the two ends. So I'm going to use this construction line, and as I mouse over the construction line, the rectangle turns from a point or a plus to an X, and then when I get close to about in the center, now that little triangle pops up. That is your constraint symbol for center. All right, select there, and now what I want, instead of this just being as wide, I want to make it a little bigger, just because it adds a little flair. Okay. Now from here, I'm going to trim out some parts. Chop, choppity chop. Okie doke. That works for now. Finish sketch. Okay. Now when I go to revolve this one, pre-selects that profile, axis, same. I'm gonna have to zoom out so I can get at the Z-axis. Whoop. Automatically creates a little tray. Super friggin' duper. Okay. New body within here. This is where I'd said before, you can create new components. You could be drawing everything under one component and then start a new one just on its own. It's not going to have the same sketches and everything, but it'll be its own isolated component if that's what you want. but I'm just going to do a new body. Okay. All right. Well, super. Let me go all the way back up, reactivate the whole thing. And I'm going to use Shift in, as in Shift November. This is going to auto assign colors to the different components so you can see more clearly what you're doing. So the default one, this light gray, this is actually an appearance of steel. That's just this default setting. You can change appearances by pressing the A button. This is how you bring up appearances. And this is where you can just play around, find some stuff you like. You want to make it glass? Look for glass. And let's see, smooth glass, cool, pretty blue. You can select, drag over an item, and it will take on that appearance. All this grid work and stuff is a reflective surface from what's below, or from the default image map that's wrapping around it. Maybe you want the bottom to look like it's a mirror. Boom. Play around with these. It's fun. For this part, we're just playing with the appearances. Doesn't really mean anything right now. Now, it switched back in my automatic view. That's because I am still on auto color assign. If I switch back, shift in, now I'm on the appearance mode. So, like I said, the appearances are just for grins, just so you can play around. But I'm going to switch back over so you can see more clearly. Now, time to add some features. Things like on the tray. If I made this dish and printed it and tried to make this a solid object, it would roly-poly around on me. I want to add a foot to this. So what I can do is now I can go back, find the sketch for this part. Let me reactivate this section, or this component rather. Right-click on the sketch, edit sketch. Now what I want to do is I'm just going to go in and add a foot. What that means is I'm just going to add a fit point spline, I think, somewhere. And I'm just going to draw a little doodaddy. Okay? Little thingy thing. Use the offset tool again. We'll do 2 millimeters. Sure, okay. And from here, I'll use the we'll use the 2-point circle again, connect the dots, makes a cleaner end. Sometimes it does that. Didn't actually draw because it got in its own way. There we are. Now, one of the problems here is now that offset line does not connect. So what I can do, use the move tool, select that vertex, drag that upward, but what's happening is because it's got a constraint already built onto it, or a coincidence rather, it's not letting me. It's dragging the whole thing. So I need to escape. I need to right-click on that point. Go down, delete coincidence. That's going to allow me to move that point now individually from the original. Problem is, it's still going to have its own constraints built up. So this is one of the times where offset is not as useful. Or the workaround for that, just draw another line. There you go. That's all I needed to do. All right. So I'm probably going to tweak this a little bit. Click on there. And always just play around with it. Do all kinds of different weirdo things to it. But okay, finish sketch. Now that disappeared. Crap, what happened? Now I have to adjust the revolve. Edit feature. Need to go back in and select those parts too. What's going on here? Might not be connected all the way. Nope, they're still there. So then fine. We'll just select all the things. There we are. All right. Hit OK. Now when I orbit down, now my plate has a lovely little foot. So really easy way to add features like that. All right, cool. But I want to work on the vessel itself. So I'm going to go reactivate the whole thing. And I'm going to hide the tray for now. I don't want to work with that. All right. So now what I want to do, I want to add a foot onto this one as well. we'll go a little more simple. I'll go back into this component, find my original sketch. There we are. Edit sketch. Let's add a foot to this. For this one, I want something a little more angular, so I'm going to start on there. And just going to look at angles, let's say 120 degrees, just for grins. And we'll make that little foot 2.5 millimeters long. What happened? Oh, it changed my, I forgot to tab over. There we go. Make sure you're tabbing over. Okay, one line down, let's make another. So now I can move this over, select, we'll use the offset again. Now, this is going to cause some funky stuff, so maybe instead of the offset, I want to use something else. Cancel, and instead, I'm going to copy and paste this. Or what I can do is bring up the Move tool, and at the bottom of the Move tool, you'll see this checkbox down here, Create Copy. That's an easy way to also create copies at the same time as you're moving them over. So I'm going to do that, move one over, and you see it's going along in a straight line. Mildly problematic, but not really. So 2 millimeters, sure, why not? Okay, sounds good. Draw a straight line between those. All right, now zooming in. Well, I just drew that line over. What's going on? It's not the same profile, or it's not closed. Zoom in further and you'll see it's not quite there. So anytime that something is not showing up, always a good idea to just go ahead and make sure, zoom a little bit closer, further in, and see if it's actually closed. All right, got that. I don't want these quite sharp angles, so I'm going to use the fillet tool. There's a fillet tool within the drawing. Go to there, and maybe more 0.25. Neat. Do the same. Flip floppity bloop. Okay. Now I am going to trim this out so I don't have to go back and make some adjustments. Now that did mess with the original drawing, so we'll see what happens. Finish sketch. No big deal. Now my big urn thing has a little foot. Is it too small? Yeah, probably, but you get the idea. Now, as I said before, one of the things is you need to make sure there are drain holes on this. All right, well now I want to make a hole in the bottom, but I want to make multiple holes. So this is where you can use the sketch tool, but the circular pattern, but I'm not going to use the circle pattern in the sketch itself. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create the holes, add any additional features to those holes, and then use the pattern tool to recreate the completed feature all around. It will save me steps rather than having to go and do each one, each time, each individually. So it's a different way of working to get to the same effect. So what that means is I'm going to start a new sketch on this component. New sketch. I want to work on the XY plane, looking straight down. Top view. All right. So one of the things, if you're going to be creating multiples, I highly recommend you work off of one of the major axes, meaning don't just draw somewhere out in between in space. Start it somewhere on one of the major axes. All right. So I'm going to create a circle and somewhere around there. Now that might well be the problem because that might be actually where my foot is. So we'll start and go from there. We'll make this 6 millimeters. That's probably about right. Okay. Is it right on the foot? Maybe. Find out soon enough. All right, so let's finish the sketch. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the extrude tool to cut through. So, extrude that profile, and now I'm going to drag it straight down. And you'll see that the operation automatically changes to cut. Now, one thing I want you to take note of. The tray is hidden right now. If I did not hide the tray, that cut is going to extend through both components. Fusion works on whatever is visible. Even though I'm working on the other component of the plant vessel, not the tray, because the tray is visible, it will affect that tray. So keep that in mind. If that you're trying to avoid that feature, hide the tray, all set. Also, you can make that a little bit shorter, but okay, that works. Cut. Now it's using that extrusion to make that little hole there. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to put a couple fillets on that hole. So rather than, I can select both the rings or I can just select the edge there. Let's see, about one. Yeah, 1 millimeter works. It just rounds that out. Actually, it's a little bit large. I'm going to use 0.5. All right, there we go. So all that did was just round over those edges. Okay, so like I said, rather than create each individual thing and make multiple fillets and multiple holes, all of that, it's a lot easier to create that one completed feature. Now I'm going to use the circle pattern to create multiples of the same. So I'm not starting a new sketch. That feature is still within the create section. It's just that it's also in the sketch tool set. So select on down to pattern, circle pattern. Now you have different options for the faces. You can make multiple bodies, components, whatever, but I want the faces. So you can't quite select everything from here, but if I do a from the left selection box and select only, or it's only going to select what is completely inside that box, let go, and now it's selected just that. Great. Okay, axis, same. Now this gets sometimes tricky. If you can see what you're doing, great. You might have to, when you're working like this, might have to hide that body to get to the access point, then you can unhide it again. But see how now it has recreated that feature multiple times. Now it's still opaque because I haven't completed the tool yet. From here, you can make multiples, 3, 4, 5, more. Like I said, this is one of the things that I don't recommend using the slider. You can, but as you use the slider, it can, especially if this is a complex form or a complex feature, it can really bog down your computer because it's recalculating for every single time. I really recommend doing this just by numeric input, so it's only calculating that one time. So especially if you had a really complex thing and you're making like a couple hundred of them, for doing like making teeth on a gear or something like that, it can really bog your computer down. So there you go. All right, 5 holes, click OK, blip, bloppity, bloop. Now you've repeated the completed feature rather than having to make multiple steps for each one. Just an easier way to work. All right, we zoom out. And from here, that's effectively the project. Now, are there more things you can do to this? Absolutely. These are the basics of the project. Let me unhide the tray. It has a foot. It's a separate component. My vessel has drain holes. For the most part, we're good. I could do other things to this. Things like, say I wanted to plant like an maybe I want to make this into an orchid pot. So it has multiple holes on the sides and such too. This is where you can add additional features. So hide the tray. I'm going to hide the body for the moment. And I'm going to create a sketch on the face here. But I'm just going to kind of freeform something here. Let's just kind of doodle and make some weird doodadery. Okay, that works. I'm going to use the offset tool. I don't know, sure, 6. Neat. I'm going to again use the 2-point circle. Make a couple of features here. Go to gumdrops. Do it again. Trim and trim. Okay, finish sketch. Super. What's the point of that? Unhide body. Now I'm going to use the extrude tool. Pull that forward. And now that has cut through the side of the vessel itself. Cool. Leave it uncut. Super good. I can go through and use fillet again. Maybe I want to just round those out just a wee bit. 0.25. Probably good. Hooray. Well, now I can do the exact same thing that I did to the bottom, to the sides. So I'm going to use, again, pattern tool, circle, faces. I want to select all of that. And it's going to be a little bit harder to select the whole thing there. Hopefully I don't select all kinds of other stuff. Might have to just do this by hand. Or orbit upwards. Now I am seeing just there. Didn't get everything. Damn. Deselect. There we go. Okay, selected just those internal face. All right, axis, back to the Z axis. This is how I could create multiple things along the surface now, because it's going to completely hug that original geometry. So this is why I say it's a lot easier to use the circle pattern tool on a completed feature rather than individual things. Works a lot easier. So same thing of using the slider. If I add to this and make a whole bunch of multiples, that's really going to bog down the computer. Now it didn't right there. We're good. Spacing, a little off, so maybe I'll drag that down to 24 instead. Okay. Just going to think about it for a minute. That's what I mean by I can bog down stuff pretty good. Plus, I'm also running multiple programs at once. So give me a moment. Let this calculate. This be the dead air space time. Sorry, taking a moment longer than I would hope for. Pause. There it goes. Hooray! Now it's barely a solid vessel at all. But so this next project is, like I said, very much an extension off of what we were just working with, but you can definitely play with a lot of the features in different ways. Or rather, you can use a lot of the same skills, same sketches, still based on sketches, using circular patterns, offsets, all of that fun, just working in a different plane using a new tool. So play around with it. The main goal is, again, at least 2 components, probably just 2 components, must have at least drain holes or some other sort of feature. And it's created using profiles that are revolved. Pretty straightforward. The appearance is optional, but if you want it to be there, super freaking cool. Okie doke. Have fun with it and please ask questions.